The story starts with a line saying hired fighters who do not die are third rate. Next we see a knight with his sword. It is explained why they make so much money. The reason is because they are expected to gladly die for their boss. Hearing this kind of silly talk from bosses, every single day something is being poured into a liquid. A hand tosses the liquid from a small bottle onto the fire. The person talking wonders what more he could possibly do. In that moment we see a man sitting alone, thinking this is the hired fighter life. The main character then says all the nobles are truly the same. He complains when they need them they promise land and even big titles. But in the end they all break their word with silly reasons as if the whole thing was planned. Standing on a fort wall, the man says what they just told him takes the cake. Then with a mean smirk he wonders if he heard the words right. View pulls back showing our character and another man up on the wall. He talks to the other man who looks to be a guard leader. The leader glares at him and says he did not hear wrong. He wants the hired fighter to meet his end. Jake asks if the noble forgot who he is, but the other confirms he is the captain of the Fang hired fighter group. With that Jake cracks a smile thinking it is a joke since the man knows who he is. He keeps saying otherwise there would be no way he could give an order like that. The order would be for a simple hired fighter like him to die fighting like a noble knight. We see the scene from behind Jake who stares down the leader in front of him. The leader then seems to think again about his words. He admits he spoke too fast. The leader says sorry if he made Jake misunderstand, but the hired fighter gets suspicious about the word misunderstand. The noble explains he only wanted to give the hired fighter captain a final job. Jake listens closely while the leader explains because of their many losses the odds are heavily against them. The city is being destroyed in the middle of flames. A group of knights is shown. The leader keeps explaining the situation. He says the rebel blades are at the throat of House Crawford which defended this place for years. The noble admits with nowhere left to retreat his words came out in a rush. Jake then smiles and says he completely understands the leader's situation. With a mean grin he comments given the situation it makes perfect sense. The person talking thinks it is time to run. It is a shame as the noble was once skilled and one of the more fair ones. Jake thinks about this final job and wonders if they will make an escape path before the final pay, but the leader tells the job is simple. The next day the rebels will attack with all they have. He wants Jake and his men to hold the enemies until his lord can safely escape. If that is not possible, he asks them to fight by his side at least until he himself dies in battle. To get him to do it, the noble offers a large red jewel as pay for the service. The noble says the jewel would cover costs for 3 years, but Jake suddenly attacks him driving his sword into him. Shocked, the leader asks what on earth the hired fighter thinks he is doing. Jake replies angrily, he is the one who should be asking that. If the noble thought he was a fool, he yells this order is basically for them to serve as human shields for the noble's escape. Jake ends saying even if they fought they would only buy a little time. They are being thrown away so the lord can run. Jake questions the plan and asks what would happen if they pulled off a miracle. The leader looks at Jake and starts talking about the nature of hired fighters. He says they are hired fighters, not knights, so the enemy would not chase them after their death. The main character gives a mocking laugh. He says that would perhaps happen if the world worked the way it should. With a mean smile, he reminds the noble his hired fighter group is well known. He explains to the enemies his group is a hated foe they swore to wipe out at any cost. The scene then changes to a forest. A knight is coughing while another watches him from far away. Suddenly, a mysterious hand grabs the arm of the getting better knight. The soldier is dragged behind a tree and attacked. Knights walk up in the back. Next, we see the knight being violently hit by a surprise attack. His friends watch in shock and confusion, not understanding what is going on. It is then shown the attacker is Jake. He says coldly this is an ambush. One of the knights yells in despair they are not their own troops, but the Fang hired fighter band. A noble on a horse says they are dressed up using the armor of their fallen friends. He shouts angrily the hired fighters do not have an ounce of honor. Jake moves fast and attacks him, giving him no time to react to the blow. After a quick moment, the noble is already on the ground, completely beat by the main character. We see Jake's cold set look from under his bloody helmet. Back now, the jewel is on the ground. Jake reminds the leader how many leaders he has already taken out. He glares at the noble and says the enemies are more interested in finishing them off than the lord. The leader grits his teeth, clearly upset with the situation. Then Jake blames him, saying he was counting on that too, planning to pull all the attention onto them. The noble replies with a serious look all he asks is for the job to be done. He continues and threatens the hired fighter, saying if he says no, he will have to take him out and take command. With that threat, the main character jumps back, getting away from the leader on the wall. Jake stares at him in anger and says he thought he was different, but he is actually the worst kind of trash. The noble then turns around and offers real apologies for his words, but Jake replies there is no need for apologies and that this works out for him. The hired fighter explains he can deliver the leader's head to the enemies camped out there without feeling bad. The noble asks if he plans to do that to save his own life. Jake confirms he would love to do that and run, but the leader sees the hired fighter has already made sure they cannot simply walk away. The captain then says he will do what he can until the end. If they deliver 2 heads, the enemies will be happy. The leader is confused by the number 2 and asks if to save his men. He wonders if Jake is planning to offer his own head as part of the deal. The main character explains every one of his men was dragged into that hired fighter life by. He keeps saying they trusted him and followed him, so he needs to take the blame. With his sword in hand, the man calls himself their captain, ready for whatever comes. The noble watches him with a look of respect for his leader's stance. Then he lets out a laugh and agrees with the hired fighter captain's words. The leader ends by saying that is the true meaning of leading other people. The leader is sorry about the situation. He says if his lord was not Zara Crawford, things would be different. So he then says he wishes Jake had been his lord instead of the current one. After hearing those words, the hired fighter captain moves fast in the noble's direction. With an angry and set look, he gets ready to give a final blow. The noble, for his part, stands still, seeming to accept his end before the coming attack. He then asks Jake not to forgive him for what he did and for what he became. The main character keeps his look fixed and cold as he keeps his attack against the leader. The noble is hit and thinks things turned out as he feared. The difference in power was too big. He thinks about the unfairness of skill and accepts his end at the hands of the hired fighter cap. Hurt Jake thinks he told his men to run if he did not return. He can leave without worry. He thinks he was always ready for this kind of end. But he still has one question. In his final moments, he wonders how far he could have gone if he had the same chances as the nobles. Everything goes dark. A faraway voice asks him to wake up from his deep sleep, but the scene changes to a rich room. A young man with orange hair asks someone in the bed to wake up. The blonde person in the bed slowly opens his eyes. He asks, confused, who that boy is. He looks at his own hand, which is now pale and soft with a fancy sleeve. The boy shakes him, desperately yelling for him to wake up. This leaves him even more shocked. Suddenly, he is slapped across the face. He is completely lost, wondering what happened. Annoyed, he questions who would hit someone out of nowhere. While the boy asks him to calm down, the main character, now in the body of a young blonde man, sits up in bed. He is called young Master Lucian. Completely shocked by the situation, the main character can only ask what's going on. He then sits up in the rich bed and looks around, trying to figure out where he is. Looking at his own hands, he feels something is very wrong with his body. He wonders where his rough, scarred hands from his time as a hired fighter went. Now his hands are clean and soft like a young noble's. He does not know them. Meanwhile, the boy who woke him up starts crying at the bedside, making everything more confusing. He thinks the kid just slapped him, and now he is crying like the world is coming to an end. The helper sobs in relief, saying it is a blessing the young master is alive. He thought he had died. He keeps explaining if the master had died, he would be punished, and it would be a huge problem for the house. The former hired fighter wonders what kind of nonsense the kid has been saying since he woke up. He thinks about the terms personal helper, young master, and house. He sees none of it makes sense to him. More than that, he is totally sure he died in that battle in a way no one could have saved. He then touches his own neck, wondering how his head can still be on his body. In the quiet of the rich room, he starts putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Putting all the information and what he has seen so far together, he gets to one amazing end. He gets out of bed, seeing somehow he ended up inside the body of a total stranger. And not just any stranger, but a youth with a face he thinks is very good looking. The main character then walks toward a large mirror to get a better look at his new look. Looking at his face in the mirror, he notices the noble feel. He is now part of the high-class people. Seeing the richness of the room, he sees this noble's family seems to have a lot of money. The main character decides he first needs more information. He remembers the helper's name is Hans, so he calls Hans over to ask some questions. The startled helper quickly agrees. Lucian goes to the mirror and asks what year they are in, but Hans thinks he is still sleepy from the medicine. The helper says it is the imperial year 846. This leaves the main character shocked. He saw this as 15 years before his death. He wonders if he truly went back to the past. Trying to calm himself, he thinks he cannot freak out over every little thing that happens. He decides to focus on what needs to be done first. He turns to his personal helper, Hans. With a scary look, he asks Hans if he woke up today with a wish to die. This terrifies the boy. He questions how a simple helper dared to put hands on his master's body without permission. Lucian asks if the house rules changed while he was out. He demands an answer. Then with a serious look, he asks the most important question. He wants to know who he is. Hans is completely shocked and speechless by his master's question. The helper bows desperately, begging forgiveness for being rude and losing his cool earlier. He reveals his master's name is Lucian Valdek, the third son of the great house Valdek. Hearing the name, the main character is surprised and thoughtful about the news. The flag with the family mark is shown. He sees he knows that name. He wonders if they're talking about that famous and strong house Valdek. House Valdek is a noble family that helped the empire for years. It is a high-class family that works directly next to the emperor. The power they had is almost on the same level as the royal family itself, being a true great house. The main character thinks he actually knows that house well because 15 years in the future, he reveals that House Valdek was the place where he worked for years as a simple guard. Now, after dying in battle, he wakes up and finds he is the third son of that very house. Unable to believe the funny twist of the situation, he thinks this must be a big joke from fate. He thinks throughout his life, because of his low and poor start, the former hired fighter had to take every kind of hard thing the world threw at him. And now, after everything he went through, he gets this kind of unique and surprising chance. He remembers his last question about how far he could have gone if he had the chances of a noble. He decides if this is what fate wants, he will take the challenge with everything he has. So with a new will, he opens the room's windows, letting the sunlight stream in. He says he will show everyone how far he can go and how he will live this new life. The view then focuses on the huge and rich Valdek family home in the daylight. Walking through the halls with hands, he thinks this is Archduke Valdek's property. He thinks he has seen many places as a hired fighter, but this is by far the most over the top of all. And above all, it is the place he will have to get used to as fast as possible. However, as he walks through the home, he sees something still bothers him quite a bit. He notices the strange way the helpers keep looking and whispering about him since earlier. The main character feels the looks he gets from them are anything but normal. Something is wrong. He asks Hans if it is his imagination. But the helper tells since he shut himself away, the young master has not seen anyone besides him for 1 year and 2 months. This leaves the main character stunned. The main character wonders what kind of story this is. What drove the young man to lock himself away for so long? He thinks nobles think differently, but in this house it would not be possible to act as one pleased. That is because the man who protects the empire with strict rules, Archduke Sigund, is here. Former hired fighter ends. There is no way that man would simply watch his son rot in his room. At this, he thinks either Lucian was a problem child or there was a reason for the Archduke to ignore it. He decides until he finds out what happened he would avoid meeting the Archduke. But someone stops him. An older man walks up and says the report on his getting better was true. He says he could not be happier to see young Master Lucian after 1 year. He then asks if Lucian has any trouble moving. The main character knows him. He remembers this was Chief Butler Edwin, who entered the home as a hostage when he was young. His skill got him the job of house manager. He is the Archduke's right-hand man. Lucian thinks this is not good as he has run into the person he most wanted to avoid. The only thing he can count on is that it has been 1 year since Edwin last saw Lucian. In that case, he decides he will just have to put on a show and pretend to be the real young master. To do this, he decides he will copy the most noble person he knows. With a smile, he thanks Butler Edwin for his care. Trying to seem natural, he keeps up the act, saying thanks to everyone's care he has gotten better quite well. Lucian explains he came out to see the house. It was lucky to run into the butler right away, and Sonny asks if there have been any problems in the family while he was not there. Edwin smiles and replies House Valdek is well and doing well. He is happy to see him well too. Lucian smiles and says with Edwin guarding the place there could not be problems. He thinks the butler did not suspect a thing. He then turns to leave, saying he will return feeling peaceful because he is tired from having gone out for the first time in a long time. But the butler stops him and asks the young master to forgive his boldness at that moment. He then asks Lucian to put off his return for an instant. The main character turns around surprised by the request. The butler tells with a serious look someone wishes to see him at this moment. The main character feels uneasy because he already thinks who the person wanting to meet him is. The scene changes and we see Lucian in a large office before a man sitting at a desk. It is shown the person who wanted to see him was Archduke Sigmund himself, his father. The young master stands quietly before his father's big desk. The Archduke then talks to Lucian Valdek. He says he will ask him a direct question. With a cold, deep look, the man asks his son how he is still alive. The question echoes in the main character's mind, who does not understand the reason for that shocking question. The feel in the office becomes very tense after the Archduke's surprising question. The main character is confused and replies he is not sure what his father means by that. The leader of House Valdek then says he was willing to ignore certain acts of his son. He tells he ignored the fact Lucian used his mother's death as an excuse to be spoiled. But he says in the end the young man crossed the line. Locking himself away for 1 year was not enough. The Archduke blames him for treating his own life lightly and even trying to throw it away. The former hired fighter is in shock and tries to ask what he is talking about, not understanding the blame. He then remembers Hans crying and sees the crying was because the real Lucian tried to end his own life. The main character then remembers the scene of the helper crying and understands the reason for such despair. He tries to explain himself to his father, but the Archduke stops him and tells him to stop stalling. The man demands Lucian right away say what he has hidden in his small heart. The Archduke blames him for trying to put sleeping pills in his own father's mouth. Stunned, Lucian hears the blame that he wanted to drug everyone. He is left without a reaction. At that moment, he finally understands why he has no memories of Lucian from his past life. He remembers as a guard 15 years ago he worked in the house. But that boy, the third son of the Valdek family, was actually already dead at that time. The person talking then formally tells us about Grand Duke Sigmund Valdek. It is shown he has 4 children, and each of them is from a different mother. During his 10 years as a guard, the main character met the other 3 children and their mothers, but he never saw young Lucian or his mother even once. It turns out the boy's mother had died young due to a strange sickness. Not long after, Lucian himself followed her to the grave for no clear reason. At the time, the former hired fighter thought the 2 of them were just weak, but that was not the truth. His mother's death and his shaky spot in the family was too much for the child to take. In the end, desperate, he chose to take an almost deadly amount of sleeping pills. He only wanted to get his father's attention, but did not count on the weakness of his body. After 1 year alone, he could not fight the effect of the medicine on his system. With that, he simply ended up dying alone in his dark lone room. The main character thinks the Archduke is being quite fair about the situation. He thinks no matter how strong he is still a father and must be hurting inside. But the former hired fighter quickly sees it is not the time to feel bad for someone else. He is the one about to be thrown off the cliff. His father made it clear it was his last chance. That was a final warning. The young noble can already hear the sound of something breaking. It was the sound of cracks forming all over his golden future he had barely got. He knows if he says a single word that does not please the Archduke, all will be lost. At best, he would be sent to a faraway church as a priest forever, or he would be dragged to a frozen land to fight beasts and live like a nobody. But the main character will not take that because this is a new life he barely managed to grab. He will not let a family drama ruin this precious path that lies ahead of him. So he talks to his father and says since he asked him to be honest, he will do so. The young man truly says sorry for hurting the Valk name and for causing so much worry. He takes the blame without excuses. He says he will take any punishment his father thinks is right. The Archduke thinks for a moment and says saying that now will not change what is already done. He then looks at his son and asks if it would not be good for him to simply be happy. Lucian is confused, and the father repeats what is done in the past cannot be undone. Because of that, the life that was saved from the edge should not be tied to the past anymore. The view focuses on the main character's boots as he listens to his father's words. With a new will, he says he plans to stop chaining his life to the past. He smiles and says he will live truly for the future. He asks his father for a word of help. The young man keeps saying a sorry son should be truly forgiven by his parents. Also, he says parents in turn should gladly hug that sorry son. Butler Edwin watches everything from far away and thinks the change in his master is unbelievable. He felt something had changed in the young man, but this act was more than he expected to see. Edwin wonders if that is really the same young Master Lucian he knew before. The one who used to shrink and run away from everything now showed great confidence. Meanwhile, father and son keep staring at each other in a tension-filled quiet in the office. The Archduke then breaks the quiet and asks how his son dares to lecture him on a father's duty. We see the face of the leader of House Valg, who looks furious at the boy's boldness, and says he has truly lived long enough to have seen everything. The main character sees his risky plan worked. He is relieved by his father's reaction. With a small smile, he thinks to himself his acting worked perfectly. Sweating a little, he celebrates the answer was not to bow down, but to face the situation straight on. He knew the Archduke likes a wild fighter much more than a timid mouse. That was the Grand Duke he knew from his past life as a simple guard at the home. Father says his son came back from the edge and even learned to be bold. Then the Archduke asks directly what Lucian Valdek plans to do from now on. The young man closes his eyes for a moment and replies first of all he needs to do one thing. He plans to fix his ruined body. After that, we see a picture of him as a swordsman. We see the picture of a knight with his shining sword who seems to be an idea for the main character. With a new trust, Lucian says his plan is to learn to use the sword correctly. The Archduke questions his choice, and the young man admits his body is weak, but he will figure it out. His father watches him in quiet, seeming not sure but still curious about his son's change. The leader of House Valdek says the boy talks a good game, but words are not everything. He keeps saying they will soon see if all that is just empty talk without real stuff. Next, the Archduke orders the butler to bring that thing back to the young master. Butler explains a few nice words do not mean as much as what he is about to get. Lucian gets a little uneasy and confused, not understanding what his father and the butler are planning. Edwin bows and says he understood the order and will set up for that right away. The main character wonders what this thing they talk about could be. The scene changes to the outside of the home, where some men are carrying boxes from a carriage. We see two helpers carrying a huge and heavy wooden chest into the house. The chest is opened, and to everyone's surprise, it is completely filled with gold and jewels and coins, and Lucian is shocked. The main character thinks this must be a joke. Looking at the fortune, he sees this is the wealth of a great noble house. Holding the coins, he wonders if that whole amount is just for a single month. With a mean smile, he thinks with so much money his plan is totally doable. He will be able to rebuild his weak body and create the special drink he so needs to become stronger. The view then shows us a huge and pretty greenhouse where he will probably find the things he needs. Somewhere else we see the Archduke and his butler walking through a greenhouse full of flowers. The butler then says that place was what the late Archduchess loved most in life. He had stopped going to the place, so his return now was quite big. The reason for this return is due to the great and surprising change in young Master Lucian. Edwin thinks being the son of the woman he loved so much the Lord would not leave him so easily. We see the Archduke walking alone in the middle of the flowers his late wife loved so much. The butler then thinks about the past and thinks the young master was truly pitiful. He remembers how the young man always looked around afraid of everything and everyone. He was like a beaten dog that cried as soon as someone raised their voice near him. His act was so different from his mother's that the Archduke thought he had only taken her looks. But today, for the first time, the chief butler saw him in a completely different situation. He started to think perhaps he was wrong about the young master's true skill. The Archduke then asks if Edwin saw how Lucian looked him in the eye and spoke his mind. The butler says he has a kind heart and only paused for a while but still carries the Lord's blood. The leader of House Valdek, however, seems not sure and says that remains to be seen. He explains what is to come cannot be beaten with just mere nice words. At that, Edwin changes the subject and says there is only one problem that needs to be fixed fast. So Lucian's money help was started again, but there are signs some of the funds are leaking out. After looking, it seems the second young master, Jordi Valdek, is part of this. Jordi got rid of Lucian's maid to control him. The Archduke says he is able but narrow-minded. The Archduke says Jordi's hate is understandable, but he did not think he would be so persistent. Edwin asks if he should step in, but the Lord says no. The butler worries it might be too much for Lucian. The father says this is the price the third son is paying for wasting the last 1 year. He sees this as a test. If Lucian cannot handle it, there will be no hope for him. The leader of House Valdek ends the family's blood is a key, but the person needs to open the door. Then a few days pass, and the daily life in the great and rich Valdek home continues as always. Two maids talk, wondering how many days the young master has locked himself in his room again. We see Hans with an annoyed face because 3 days have already passed since the funds started coming again. The young master's personal helper seems completely shocked by what is happening. He remembers when the master said the talk with his father went well and the money help returned. The picture of the chest overflowing with gold and precious jewels comes to his mind at that moment. Hans thinks knowing what their relationship was like, it must not have been easy for the master at all. The helper believes his young master needed huge courage to face his father like that. Touched, he thinks Lucian is set to move forward, even with his sadness on his back. But now he sees his master playing with the gold coins in a very strange and fishy way. The main character's eyes shine with an almost crazy strength as he stares at the treasure. With a mean smile, he thinks with so much money he can finally do what he wants. His big plan is to rebuild his weak and fragile body by creating a strong secret drink. The scene then changes to a room where Lucian is busy making some mysterious potion. We see the young master completely focused on his work with a very set look. The main character thinks Hans must be full of questions, but he is loyal and guards the door as ordered. And there, he is the Archduke's son messing around with alchemy tools he had never seen in his life. He spent his money on a rare herb that only grows under moonlight and is incredibly costly. The name of this plant is moonlight grass, and the young noble spent everything he had on it. He then remembers an order he gave Hans to buy more of this herb before it is too late. He knows he looks like a crazy person right now, but in just 1 year its price is going to shoot up. The main character's eyes gleam with the sure thing that the plant's value will climb a lot. He knows in 1 year the price will go up 20 times, and he lies down in a pile of the herb. With a crazy smile, he celebrates the price will soar endlessly, and he is going to make a bundle. The former hired fighter thinks the alchemists of the past truly had a lot of guts. At the time, they were not sure if it would work out, but they did not give up on the idea anyway. They then swept up every single piece of the moonlight grass from the whole empire for their big project. That was a once-in-a-lifetime bet with the future of the whole group on the line. And thanks to that daring move, they managed to create a drink that shook the whole empire. This potion became known as the Drink of the Gods and changed the world forever. People called it a sin, and they were threatened with claims of doing wrong. But as soon as its effects became known, everyone changed their minds and sang its praises. The main character holds the drink with a happy grin at the result of his work. The drink broke a truth that had never been denied for over 1,000 years in history. The truth that inborn skills are fate and that no one can go beyond the limits they were born with. The main character explains the only thing that broke the common sense of the world for 1,000 years is the famous and strong potion known to everyone as the Drink of the Gods. And just by drinking this potion, even someone without skill could become a skilled swordsman. He then admits what he made is merely a copy that falls far short of the real thing. But to get back his weak body, there is nothing better than this at the moment. With a set look, he tells himself the young noble should consider himself lucky. It is shown the real recipe was lost when the alchemists' group was burned down in the past. Because of that, the recipe for the special drink vanished from the world without leaving any trace behind. But the main character managed to put clues together and make something pretty close to the famous potion. Enough talk. He gets ready to take the potion and finally change his fate. He then drinks the liquid. What truly matters begins from that moment. The potion changes the power of nature into something humans can use called mana. The quality of the power that can be pulled depends on how the mana moves through the body. With the help of the special drink, he forcibly widens the block paths inside his body. But even with the paths open, he wonders what on earth is happening to him. Instead of feeling the pain of fight, the mana flows smoothly as if it were natural. He thinks even a newborn's body has dirty stuff that blocks flow. Surprised, he asks himself if the young noble's body is special in some way. He questions if Lucian might be one of those monsters people call a genius. The scene then changes to a city at sunset, showing a passing of time. We see Hans waiting outside the window while his young master is inside. The helper seems restless and nervous as he walks back and forth in the hall. He peeks through the crack in the door with a worried look on his face. Lucian finally leaves the room and asks Hans if anything happened while he was away. The helper runs up to him crying and asks if he knows how long he has been in there. Hans complains he called but was not answered, and that he told him not to enter no matter what. He then says he was terrified, thinking something awful might have happened to the young master. Lucian comforts him and says he was really worried about him the whole time. The main character then gives a gentle smile to his personal helper, who watches him closely. The young noble's eyes shine in a different way that Hans had never seen before. The helper is confused and wonders if that truly is young Master Lucian. With several copies of himself, he tries to look at the master and feels he is not the same person. The main character then calls Hans' name and thinks his reaction is somewhat expected. He thinks since the helper has watched him closely for so long, it is normal for him to notice the difference. On the outside, there are no big changes yet. He needs food and time for that. Lucian's body still needs care to fully get better from its weakness, but what truly matters is the inside. A shining heart is shown in his chest. That inside is changing at an unbelievable speed thanks to the special drink's power. The main character understands Lucian's natural build is what made all this possible. He is certain the young noble's body is the key to his future success. This body's skill puts him in the same group as those who changed the world forever. With a sure smile, he thinks if everything goes well, he can beat his hired fighter self in 1 year. He then tells Hans in a way he owes this chance to him. The helper looks confused. The main character grabs him and says reward and punishment must always be clear and direct. He asks Hans to listen carefully because he is only going to say this once in his life. With a crazy look, he tells the scared helper to invest everything he owns down to the underclothes he is wearing. He then promises the scared helper the most comfy life he could ever imagine. Striking a big pose, he says the two of them will soar to the heavens together. With a smile, he says he is jealous of Hans because there were no nobles like him in his time. The scene changes, and 1 week later, we see a peaceful forest full of green. Lucian and Hans are walking calmly along a path in the middle of the trees in the forest. The two walk side by side, and the main character seems to be enjoying the moment greatly. With a happy smile, he thinks this is paradise and wonders if life can be so cozy. He remembers the many meals his rich room and the bed made ready for him by others. The young noble thinks in his past life going hungry was his daily normal routine. Thanks to all this comfort, he was able to focus completely on his getting better. Also, he fixed something that had been bothering him quite a bit since he woke up. The being of Jake, the guard of House Valdek that he was in his past life. He checked with the current guard captain and found out no one matching him had signed up. The shift he used to cover is now being done by a guy he has never seen before in his life. He thinks honestly this is for the best as there is nothing good about meeting his old self. The main character admits he does not have the courage to face who he was and would die from shame. Hans then notices his master shaking and walks over worried about what might be happening. The helper calls his name and the main character turns around with a serious, very set look. Hans asks if he really plans to go into the training grounds they were coming up to. He reminds the young master he always said he hated even stepping near that place. Lucian pretends not to understand, but the helper confirms he swore never to go back there. The reason was because the second young master scolded him during training last time. From Hans' reaction, the main character sees what happened in the young noble's past. To scare Lucian, the second son used sword training to terrify him. He can guess his brother's reasons, but tells Hans he does not need to worry about it. The young noble then says all of that belongs to the past, and things have changed. He takes a step forward set to move ahead with his new life plan. With a sure smile, he tells Hans all he needs to do is trust and follow him. They go into the training grounds and we see two men talking in a corner of the place. One of them asks if it is true the third young master came there on his own. The other says yes, and says he is looking at the place with his personal helper at that moment. Somewhere else, a man with a goat wonders what on earth is going through the kid's mind. He thinks this might be better than expected and smiles in a mean and fishy way. He then orders one of his men to report this to him right away. With a mean grin, the man says he will make sure the meal is well prepared when he arrives. Lucian looks around and thinks the place is much better than he expected in a good way. He notices there are many spare weapons, and he does not even need to worry about breaking. Also, the space is wide and perfect for moving and seriously training his move. The most amazing thing is all of that is just a private place for a single person. He thinks with a sad look if he had trained in a place like this, his men might have lived longer. At that moment, the man with the goatee walks up and says his eyes were not fooling him. He keeps saying it really is the third young master, and he was so surprised he did not want to believe it. The memory of Lucian running away the moment young master Geordie taught him is still very clear. Hans looks worried as the man keeps the teasing in front of the two boys. With a mocking smile, he compares him to a lamb being chased by a hungry wolf. He says maybe that is why the young master still seems scared of that place now. The man then criticizes Hans being in a training ground holy to fighters. He then says who he is as Hendrik, and formally says hello to young Master Lucian. He reminds him a year ago he helped guide his form along with the second young master and wonders if he remembers. We see a memory of young Lucian shaking with fear during training with his brother. With a happy smile, the man says it was a truly fun moment for him. The main character thinks now things are starting to get much more interesting. With a mean smile, he sees this fellow is the type of person he expected to meet. The person talking explains knights are born into noble families and trained since childhood. Only after gaining worth in battles and jobs do they get their noble title. Upon getting the title from their lord, they finally finish their status as a knight. But the main character thinks in the end they are nothing more than costly hunting dogs with fancy collars. That is why he understands that man's proud and rude act. They are always very polite to the lords who give them wealth and also much honor. This proud act is a common trait among knights from noble families. Lucian's bad name in the family also probably plays a big part in this. They are like loyal hunting dogs who serve their masters in trade for power and status, but mainly it is because they are backed from behind and feel completely untouchable. Honestly, the main character is already starting to get tired of that proud act. He would love to give them a hard training session and fix their mind set from the start. He daydreams about how fun it would be to teach that man and his proud brother a lesson, but he knows if he did that the Archduke would not just stand by without doing anything. Knights are the main force and valuable things of an important noble house like theirs. He thinks it is not the right time to act yet, and that he needs to be more patient for now. He then says avoiding the training grounds forever would be pitiful, and that he is going to learn to fight. The young man says since 1 year has already passed, there is no more time to waste on past nonsense. The man laughs and says the young master truly enjoys his jokes and does not take him seriously. Lucian asks if at 16 it is too late. Hendrik explains after 15 it is over. Sword forms are secret skills left by ancestors that make the body and mind better, but he explains this only means something if the mana path has been open from the start. Sword forms without understanding are just an empty shell and completely useless. With a mocking smile, he says perhaps that fits the third young master well. The other knights laugh as Hendrik teases him to become the greatest dancer in the empire. Another man joins the mockery and says he could spend his days taking care of gardens. The lesson was clear after all. Everyone has a role that suits them best in life. Hendrik then laughs and says how the young master is quiet and unable to say anything. He thinks the claim about the mana path closing at 16 is a lie. The real goal is to crush a fool with his own not knowing, leaving him without things to say. The picture of a pitiful worm scared and frozen in place comes to the knight's mind. Lucian then says what Hendrik is talking about seems a little different from what he knows. He says the mana path closes at 25, so it is fine to learn now. He then asks if his brother Jordi thinks the same way and says this is common knowledge. Hendrik sees he cannot argue after he used the second master's name. The main character understands even his brother said that and sees the seriousness of the situation. He then grabs Hans ahead and says it looks like House Valdek is heading toward ruin. Hans is confused and wonders why he is suddenly being dragged into that talk. Lucian yells that's the basics, and even a stray dog would know, and wonders how he does not know. He is sad about how many skilled people had their chances stolen because of that wrong knowledge. The young noble then says thinking his brother has an empty skull is maddening. He yells if what Hendrik said is true, this is a shame to the house and a clear crisis. With a mean smile, he says he does not believe the knight would try to trick him with such nonsense. The scene then returns to normal, and the three men are standing in the middle of the training grounds. Hendrik stammers and says he would never do that. Lucian blames him of lying with nonsense. The main character then pretends to give up and says the situation is so unbelievable he is talking rubbish. With a fake smile, he says a knight of House Valdek would not stoop to something so petty. Hendrik quickly agrees, but Lucian stops him and says in that case one cannot laugh. The knight is quiet at the change in act of the family's young master. The main character then says he will explain the situation so everyone can understand better. At that moment, the second young master, Jordi Valdek, shows up at the training grounds. He runs up to him and says he will explain everything that was happening at that moment. Desperate, he tries to explain, but Jordi stops him before he can finish. The second young master tells him to stop because there is no need to explain the situation. With a mocking smile, he says he does not need an explanation because he saw everything with his own eyes. He walks up and says he saw his shame at being fooled by a child who barely lived. Jordi glares at him with hate and says that is more than let down for a knight. He then tells the man to fix his look and stop making that beat face. The second master threatens him and tells him not to put him in an even more shameful spot. Jordi then turns and walks slowly toward his younger brother and the helper. Hence grabs Lucian's arm and says his brother seems to be really angry. The main character thinks his brother's look of anger is really something to admire. Then the second young master of House Valdek, Jordi Valdek, a noble among nobles, is introduced. His group was weak, so he brought many outsiders, but most did not come to a good end. If he judged someone useless, he would make up a crime and get rid of the person without thinking twice. Lucian greets him with a smile and asks if he has been well since the last time they saw each other. Jordi stares at him with a cold look and says he really is very slow to understand things. The second master walks up and Hans clings to his master, afraid of what is to come. He tells he saw everything that happened between him and Hendrik, every word that was said. With a mean smile, he says Lucian acted in a way that shames the house dignity. The main character asks him to explain more clearly how he shamed the Valdek family.